Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stephen Long. Welcome to the X Factor. This is the podcast for leaders by leaders. I'm speaking with Sheri Orlowitz today, and she's a owner of a private equity firm, but she's got her hands into a bunch of other things. So, Sheri, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Sure, Steve. Artemis Holdings is our investment firm. We invest exclusively today in the cannabis industry, making usually seed and Series A investments. And my focus has been for the last 3 years on the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation. That council brings stakeholders, not just cannabis industry people, together with federal regulatory agencies in order to create a safe and accessible industry. And in fact, I just had the pleasure to talk to Dr. Janet Woodcock, the principal deputy. And FDA will be appearing on our webinar at uscfcr.com on October 27th at 1 o'clock. And it is the first time that the FDA cannabis products group is actually speaking to the industry. So it portends to be an excellent opportunity for all to understand how the FDA is involved in the regulation of cannabis.
Wow. That's fascinating because, as we were speaking beforehand, I told you that while I was pursuing my PhD at the University of Kansas, I was the drug education instructor for the athletic department. And all the athletes were required to take my class called Drugs in Sport. And we focused not only on recreational drugs, but also performance enhancing drugs. But I came out of that class, after teaching 2 years of it and understanding the research, that cannabis was so much more healthy than just about anything else that I covered in that class. But growing up as an athlete and having the stigma attached to cannabis, it took me that class to say, weed's not that bad. And there's actually some really great effects from it. So how are you fighting that stigma and releasing it? Because, I live in Colorado and, that stigma doesn't exist here in Colorado, but I know it exists in other parts of the country.
Oh my goodness, it exists everywhere. People think that cannabis is an evil weed. I understand where it comes from. The government ran an excellent PR campaign to run it off the face of the earth. But like all plants, it grew back, or like some plants, it grew back. And the United States taking another look at it. And that look requires folks that understand the federal government. I am a former DOJ lawyer. I've worked for state, I've worked for commerce. I've worked with our president, and at the end of the day, we will have a cannabis industry, and how it develops in part is going to be part of our responsibility to work with people. And it is a medicine. It has many medicinal qualities. Some of it is anecdotal. Some of it is actually scheduled drugs such as Epidiolex. That is a pure cannabis drug. It's CBD in sesame oil. And that molecule is capable of addressing intractable epileptic seizures, and it has given relief and given back the lives to so many people. So that's just one molecule of over 400 or 500, depending on how you count.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I think there's so many things that we don't know. So, you're in this, you're in this industry, and it's a growing industry and it's a young industry. So, and, you're a leader of it, because of your background and where you're located. And so what is the best aspect of being a leader?
Being a leader is you don't have to answer to other people. I used to think that was wonderful because, if I had to answer to people, I would not work.
Mhm.
Not because I am not collaborative, but because I always have so many ideas that I would drive someone nuts. So frankly, being a leader gives me the opportunity to develop ideas with really bright people, such as I'm doing with this council, to understand the medicinal properties of marijuana. And we have science people, we have lawyers, we have policy people, and actually some of the top professionals in their field, both in science, policy, law. And you know, you get to do things like that. And one of the things that really moves me with regard to this is the chance to create opportunity for folks that have been marginalized or have been hurt by unwise cannabis laws. And that is something that the federal government is in an incredible position to do through its federal agency, the SBA. And I am really looking forward, because opportunity without money is not a whole lot of opportunity. But the SBA, which is a federal agency, the Small Business Administration, gives loans and grants and training and mentoring, and it's a wonderful agency. And so being a leader gives me the opportunity to try and make the world a better place and create opportunity.
That openness, that wide barriers, if you will, I think is really important as far as just expressing the curiosity that we all have. And I had an earlier Zoom call with a former client, and she has a startup. And I said, how did your behavior change? She says, one thing as a leader, I don't ask people, well, what do you think? Because they're just going to tell me what I want to know. Right. And so I changed from, tell me where you think we can get better. Okay. Which is just an openness type of question, and it seems like we can, I think that's something that all good leaders do, is that you find yourself as a leader looking for that openness. But I think, as a leader like yourself, is that, you don't have to answer to anybody, but people have to answer to you, but that whole thing of openness, I think, just permeates your organization.
Well, it's interesting. People in a collaborative setting, people do not answer to me. I absolutely try to set the, if you will, the atmosphere. I try to set the values. I try to set the ideals of the organization. But I really look to the folks that I work with, and they don't work for me in any way, shape, or form. They work with me because they have so much more expertise than I do. And they're the ones who really are shaping this organization. I'm sort of a conductor. I am bringing the instruments of safe and accessible industry together, but they really are the ones to whom I answer.
I just keep on running into that with really, effective leaders, is that they hire people who are smarter than they are, and they don't have that ego where they have to be the smartest person in the world, or smartest person in the room. And I'm wondering, where did you learn that, or how do you attribute that, that quality that you either acquired or that you have naturally?
Stephen, I went from turning companies around, and I think you probably know that doing turnarounds of manufacturing companies, which is what I did for 20 years, was not a collaborative experience. At the end of the day, I was responsible for my and other people's money. And so I had to make sure that things were going the way they had to go. It was never collaborative. And so this has been quite a learning experience. And part of it is how our society has changed. You probably remember Sunbeam Al.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Chainsaw Al.
Exactly.
Al Dunlop.
Exactly. That was my model.
Wow.
And I actually went up to Biddeford and looked at a company that he was selling. It made the blankets it made the coverings for the electric blankets. And, this was the way that you created businesses, because you had so much fluff, so much lack of understanding of middle management, of where management was going, especially with big companies and then companies that are smaller. There's always an opportunity, but that opportunity did not call for collaboration. So this has been a learned process. Over 20 years of being part of the nonprofit world as well. And over 20 years, I have probably been on the board of over a dozen nonprofits.
Yeah, but isn't that a great lesson for everybody to learn, that, people are capable of change?
Oh, yes.
From an
Yes,
authoritarian model to more of a democratic model.
yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what do you see as the primary leadership responsibility?
I see it as not telling people what to do, but asking people what to do and listening to what they have to say. And
And
then bringing them together and helping them and helping the company understand that the best ideas are collaborative. I
but
call it collective wisdom. The group often comes up with so much better than what I come up with.
but that's so antithetical, to our educational model, where the smartest person in the classroom always gets the most amount of airtime. Right. And so we're conditioned from our early days that the smartest person in the room should be the one speaking and not listening. So that's something, I think that's another learned behavior, because we're always looking for smart leaders, at least supposedly, right? Yeah, we want the smart leaders, but then we want them to be, generous and almost acquiescing a little bit, and I'm wondering, from your experience or watching other leaders develop, how does somebody who's been rewarded and reinforced, throughout their whole lives, to be, the smartest person, and then to be the center of attention, to actually say, no, I want to hear from you.
I think smart leaders understand that getting things done requires buy-in, even in a turnaround situation. I mean, I had a group of folks that I worked with, and that group was my turnaround group, and that was collaborative.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, as in any turnaround situation, oftentimes you have to cut a lot of fat out of the organization, restructure it, and not being involved constantly with turnaround situations, but rather doing something, as I say, doing well by doing good, is what CFCR has provided. And I honestly believe, for a lot of folks that are working in CFCR, the opportunity to make a lot of money, because they are the thought leaders of the industry with regard to regulation, is just going to be amazing. And I think they see it too. So
Mhm.
it's a very different model than I was ever used to.
Yeah, but it almost seems like there's a sense of patience that the leader has to inculcate and internalize, that they, where if they take that more authoritarian model, just do what I say, they could make things maybe a little bit more efficient, but it wouldn't be as effective.
Well, I think you're right. I think that, and I love how you say the authoritarian model. I never really thought of myself as authoritarian. And I hope that's not how I came off, but my guess is, Stephen, I did.
Well, it's not a binary concept between authoritarian and democratic. There's a range in between.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And when you're worrying about making payroll, and in my case, I have had, lots of issues with companies I've turned around. Um, you're right. I've never come to task, or never come to actualization of what I must have been like in the past. But I much prefer this way of operating. I really do. Although making sure we're patient and we're getting things done is important.
Yeah, but you mentioned buy-in earlier, and I'm wondering, doesn't that, when you get buy-in, doesn't that take pressure off the leader, rather than instead when they just make the decision, in a silo, that if, everything comes back down to them, but if you get buy-in, one, you can be more confident in the decision, but doesn't that help take pressure off?
Absolutely. It is wonderful. Well, again, it depends on what kind of buy-in. Oh, if it's oh yes, I agree with you, or if there's real buy-in. And
Yeah.
frankly, you're right about patience, because real buy-in takes patience. It takes people disagreeing with you and coming around sometimes to the way you think, and sometimes you come around to the way they think. And that is when you really get buy-in.
when I talk to clients, and they're all type A, they're all hard charging people, they all are success oriented, and it can't happen fast enough. One of the modules that I teach is called mental toughness. And basically, mental toughness is the willingness to be patient and persistent when everybody else is losing theirs. And so patience is one of the most difficult things for this group to master, because they want things, now or before. Okay. And if they could, that usually satisfies them. But I'm wondering, how did you make that transition? Because, you were that person, and you still are that person, but you recognize that, getting buy-in and, through patience is more effective. So was it just that cost benefit analysis, or was there something more to it?
One day someone said to me, I really need to marinate on that. And I thought, what a stupid thing to say. And frankly, it was really good advice, because I recognize that oftentimes the first decision is the right one, but marinating brings different dimensions to things. You don't need to have a decision immediately, and getting input only makes for better decisioning. So as a youth, I was very quick to decide, very quick to, seem like I was in charge. I knew what I was doing. I knew where we were going. And yes, now I enjoy the journey more, and people enjoy being part of this journey, and they give more.
Mhm.
And it's just a very different world in some respects that we're in today. The way that the sunbeam owls of the world, chainsaw owls of the world behave would not fly at all today, as you well know.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know. So, part of it is really learning to enjoy the journey and not the result always, especially.
But that's really where the rub isn't it, Sheri? Is that, people are, these type A people, right? And I'm one of them, you're one of them, right? We want results, right? And so why do we have to wait for them when we know we can get them right now, right? But then we take this, we cross the chasm, and we learn somewhere along the way that the process is actually more important, right? And we find that the process is more important, so therefore we actually get a better result. It may not be as efficient, but it's, like I said, but it's more effective.
Well, if it's more effective, it's more efficient. I say that to you because if you're efficient and lousy, what do you have? Or if you're
Yeah.
efficient and more, but if you really, I changed the way I measure things. I changed my definitions of success. And Stephen, that may come with age. Definitions of success are not all about money.
Mhm.
It's not all about achieving that next ring. Again, for me, I'm older. I started turning around companies in my 40s. I'm now in my 60s. And, I think about some of the journey that I was on that I didn't enjoy that I could have enjoyed. It was really quite exciting, but I was so busy trying to get to that next rung. I didn't even take a look and really look around and see where I was and what I had accomplished, and took pleasure in that because it was always what's next.
Right. So I'm going to ask you a really hard question, and I understand if you won't be able to answer it. Right. But this, this emotional maturity thing is so important that if you can facilitate emotional maturity in people, then you get the efficiency with the effectiveness. Okay. And so if you could turn back the clock and put your mindset, the mindset that you have now, 20 years ago, right? How would things be different? And if they would, how would they be different?
I'll tell you, I've thought about that.
Okay.
After my first LBO, I learned a lot. I understood a lot. And what I would have done differently is put somebody else in the position of CEO and taken a board seat.
Okay.
That's how I would have done it differently.
Yeah. All right. And where you maintain the role as an advisor rather than the, rather than the execution person.
Exactly. So I, as a CEO, was always reporting, even though it was my money and other people's money when I was doing turnarounds. And let me be on the board. Let me hold somebody else to account.
Mhm.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. So that leads to the next question is about strategy execution. So what advice would you give to other leaders regarding, executing strategy to the best of their ability and to the fullest amount possible?
Well, if you accept the strategy and you agree, and generally speaking, strategy comes from the board, although it comes from the CEO and the board together, then the tactics come. It's a problem when the strategy is not accepted by you or the people below, frankly, the people you work with.
Mhm.
And strategy is something that you just can't dictate. You can say, here's where I am, here's where I want to go, this is the way I think we can get at it. And then out of the box, nothing ever goes straight. So you really do need to be strategic along the way, and you have to be prepared to pivot. And you may have had the most wonderful strategic plan, but as it plays out and as you're part of the journey, you can make even better decisions as you carry out what the goals and the ideas of the strategy are.
Okay. So generally speaking, what have you found over your experience to be some of those things that cause, an organization to pivot?
Money, losing customers. In my case, I had a huge environmental issue in one of my companies, brought to me by representations and warranties of the sellers, which was a large multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, that weren't true. So all of these things, they're part of business, and you're constantly pivoting, because things happen. Customers go bankrupt. Customers come in with ridiculously huge orders, and are you going to be able to fill them? You want the money? Do you fill them? And I'm speaking from manufacturing because
Yeah.
my background is 30 years of turning around manufacturing companies.
Mhm.
You're that person who is the head of your operations leaves. Now what? Okay, they understand the machinery and the equipment and the inventory. Now what are you going to do? All of these things are basic day-to-day things that do make you pivot.
Okay. So how would you describe a CEO who knows how to pivot? Like, what are their qualities?
Someone who listens, who reacts, who's not afraid, is courageous, um, faces problems with honesty to himself, to the board, to the people they work with. Someone that has integrity. Integrity is critical. Your people are looking at you all the time, and treating people with respect.
Okay. So how do you get through to a CEO who may be lacking in some or all of those qualities? Because if they're the opposite of what you just said, then obviously they're going to have trouble pivoting, which is only going to hurt the company, right? And obviously you're responsible for the company. And so how do you get that person who's reluctant and resistant to pivoting?
There's a lot of ways, as you know. Coaching is one of them. Having your main people coached is something I didn't grow up with, betting you didn't, but boy, it makes a big difference. And if they're not coachable, then guess what? You're going to have to move on if you want, depending on the kind of organization you want. If you want an organization where the CEO is just going to do the same thing, it's probably not the person that needs to be in the job.
There's an old joke about irreplaceable people, in that there's cemeteries are filled with them. Okay, so talent, believe me, I started my career as a college football coach, and talent is imperative, right? But being a college football coach, I also realized that talent wasn't all that what it's cracked up to be, because lots of times those really talented players don't pan out. And so you can have, a CEO or a management team with tremendous talent, but if they lack those other skills, that prevent them from change, from pivoting, then all that talent is negated.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, you have to move on, right? And so it becomes, those things just become a career derailer. So I find it fascinating that, strategy is relatively straightforward and simple, and, but it really comes down to when it needs to change that can hang people up.
Oh, I agree, and I don't think any strategic path is not straight. The
Mhm.
strategic path, usually the CEOs I have, I actually did move ultimately into board positions, and the CEOs that I have worked with have been able to pivot. But I have worked with CEOs that you hit on it, that don't have the emotional maturity,
Mhm.
and they're really smart, and you don't understand why they do some of the things you do. And usually within a year, you can tell
Mhm.
that you have someone that, and this has happened to me, is too rigid and too set in a particular way that isn't working. And sometimes these people have to move on,
Yeah, but it
and
just,
they're not, and you're not able to coach them.
yeah, but it's, the rigidity is on the opposite end of the spectrum of how we started this conversation of being open. Yeah. So, all right. So who were your leadership role models when you were younger, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I had a reluctant mentor by the name of Stuart Millar, who taught me how to do leverage buyouts. And he was, among other things, the owner of Piper Aircraft. He had acquired it from Forstmann Little, and that gentleman and how he worked was difficult and funny. He said, "Well, the only reason I do this is no one would hire me," and he was right. He was not an easy person to get around, but I learned a lot about LBOs from him. I looked at some of the folks that did turnarounds, as I mentioned, Sunbeam Al, and I used to think about, cutting expenses, cutting marketing, cutting.
Mhm.
And that is tough stuff. But I don't think anybody that I admire today were the people I admired when I did manufacturing and when I ran turnarounds. So
Mhm.
today, people that I admire are policymakers, our president,
Mhm.
the folks that work day to day in making the world better. I'm kind of becoming more of a again, doing well by doing good. I think the world is moving in that direction. We have a lot more focus on social impact, and so I guess I'm trying to think of someone in the social impact space that I am really think of as a great leader, and I can't. No one comes to mind. I'm blanking out.
Okay.
Next
But
slide.
your transformation, is much like mine, coming from, football coaching where it's very top down, and, coming from manufacturing, it's basically the same model. Right. And then, we just made a shift, maybe either out of necessity or out of awareness, to move to a much more democratic model. But I think at the end, bottom line is we find that it's more effective.
Well, I cannot say it was my great insight. I got sick, and I was sick for 5 years, and that really gave me a sense of mortality, a sense of what was important, more of a need to have a purpose-driven life. I think that happens to us also with age, but certainly it does happen when you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. When there's a traumatic event, and one, it gives you the time to think, but it also can shape your perspective in a way that you haven't held before.
Absolutely. you know, your values change.
Yeah.
Absolutely, your
Yeah.
values change.
Yeah. But that's all part of the emotional, of the maturation process, is that it's not normal not to change. And, people who haven't changed, it scares me when I go back to a reunion and the person is exactly they were in high school. I was like, that's a problem. Where there hasn't been any change, and there hasn't been any growth whatsoever. What have your, as a psychologist, I'm just interested. So tell me about your life experiences, and because that's how people change. That's, to be honest with you, that's how the neurons are reconnected in your brain that forms those different perspectives that have has people change their values.
Well, it's funny you say the neurons that connect your brain, because of course, with cannabis, I've gotten interested in, and I have not indulged, but I'm so interested in the psychedelics because the whole idea behind psilocybin, I understand, is it changes the pathways. It gives you different perspectives. I don't know, honest to goodness, I haven't done it, but what I hear from people, changing those neural pathways, I shouldn't be asking the asker.
Well, I haven't indulged either, but I've seen a couple of documentaries, and psilocybin are mushrooms.
That's correct.
And the other one that's common is LSD, and they both started out in the research realm as of having not just great promise but great results. But then in the 60s, and then politicians declaring a war on drugs, it just they recategorized them into, I think, I forget the term, Schedule A or Schedule B or Schedule 2, where they're illegal and dangerous drugs, and under the right conditions they can have tremendous effects, tremendous positive effects. But just like anything else, if you abuse it, it can have really negative effects. So I think we're at we might be at an inflection point as far as reconsidering our views on drugs. What is a drug? What is what's a positive drug? What is a negative drug? I mean, Adderall. Adderall can be really helpful, but if you take too much of it, it's meth. That's really what it is. All right. And, there are people all over, from high school students on up, who are addicted to Adderall. Right. And they can't get off it. And it's just doing tremendous damage to them, but they got on it because of the performance effects. So, but that's perfectly legal. Adderall is perfectly legal. Same as Ritalin. So this whole thing, and, being a performance guy, I really got into the whole, drug culture as far as, what works and what doesn't and why it works. And there are things in some places that really work. So, all right. So now that we're talking about cannabis and drugs, how do you relax and how do you celebrate?
I am a wine aficionado.
Oh, no kidding.
I started that back when I was an actor in New York. I would, I also had another job while I was acting. And when I wasn't making money, I was selling jewelry or I was waiting tables. But every week I would buy a wonderful bottle of wine. And in those days, $20 bought you a hell of a bottle of wine.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's how I relax, with a beautiful bottle of wine and a Coravin. So I'm always drinking a wonderful wine, and Coravin keeps it fresh for weeks and weeks. So I don't necessarily go through a bottle.
I grew up drinking beer, and I haven't really drunk that since my early 30s. But if I can pair a really good bottle of wine with a really outstanding meal, it is one of my most favorite things in the world.
And good company.
And good company, exactly. Yeah, you got to pair the company as well. All right.
So when we're in Boulder, we're going to open up a beautiful bottle of wine.
Oh, fantastic.
A great meal. I'll get out there one day soon.
Yes, there's actually a great restaurant that built right into the foothills. It's just gorgeous, and they have a great sommelier there. So
great.
Yeah, we'll be in good shape. All right, so Sheri, how can people contact you?
folks are interested in cannabis and cannabis investment, they can contact me at Sheri, SHERI, at Artemis Holdings, ARTEMIS Holdings with an S.com.
Well, terrific, Sheri. Well, I greatly appreciate your time and your insight. I know how busy you are. So on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much.
And Steve, thank you. And a thrill to be with you today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks again. All right. This is Dr. Stephen Long. This has been the X Factor, and we will see you next time.